Hey everybody, how you doing today? Jim Cirile and Tanya Klein from Coverage Inc., the leader in screenplay analysis, development, and editing services since 2002. How are you today, Tanya?
Good. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. What are we here to yak about?
Today we're going to yak about adaptations and the
Ah,
problem with adaptations.
oh my goodness. Okay, you're opening a can of worms here.
All right, so let's talk about adaptations. So, adaptations meaning there's a novel or a play or a short story and you're adapting it to a screenplay.
Or simply a life story that hasn't necessarily been written down, that you now choose to adapt into a screenplay because you think it will be a great story. Boy, do we get a lot of those.
Oh yeah, yeah, we do.
Okay.
So, of course, there are certain problems. And of course, the first problem is that what works in one genre, let's say novels, doesn't necessarily work in another genre, let's say film or TV.
Oh, yeah.
For example, in a novel, you can have a lot of very intricate world building. You can have rich internal monologues. You can have half a dozen subplots. All of that is great in a novel. Doesn't work in a screenplay. And don't try to make it work because it won't.
Oh, yeah. And yet people do.
And
Uh,
yeah,
and by the way, it could work in a series. It could work in a limited series. I mean, there are definitely ways to adapt that kind of material while still, keeping that fidelity to all the other characters and subplots and, all the other things that happened that would necessarily be snipped out of a screenplay just because we don't have the runtime for it.
exactly. Another thing that often happens, coming back to real life adaptations, that we have writers who talk about their life or they've heard this great story from, the life of their grandparents and they're going to write it down as a screenplay. So suddenly we have a screenplay which, tells the entire story of somebody's life, and then that happens, and then this happens, and then that happens. And no, that does not work for screenplay purposes either.
Nope. No, it
Nope.
does not. So, what you just said, Tanya, that is the single most common error that we see with adaptations. It is so prevalent that I would say 95% of the adaptations that we get in make that mistake. So flashing red warning lights, klaxon going off, don't do this. Nobody wants these scripts. Even if, like, the core of the story that you're writing or the character that you're writing about is fascinating, is brilliant. Maybe this person has really done something absolutely incredible in their life. All that bloat to get up to the point where they actually become the thing that people know them from or that you think is the most interesting thing about them that you want to write about. We don't need any of that. Not only don't we need it, we don't want it. Okay? Let's look at Walk the Line. Okay? Great example. This is a movie that does not try to tell the entire life story of Johnny Cash. Okay? It focuses on the relationship between Johnny and June Carter Cash, that tumultuous period of time between the two of them, and it's great. It's all the better for it. Okay, it doesn't start with Johnny's birth or have formative experiences of him playing his first guitar at age 6.5 and performing for his kindergarten class. Oh my God, no, no, don't do that.
Exactly. So basically, what we're saying is find the story. What is the story you're trying to tell? And of course, if you know someone and you think their life is amazing, what exactly do you think is amazing about it? What is it that attracts you to this story, and what
Yeah,
is the crux of the drama?
right. It's going to generally be the most intense, most exciting, most dramatic, most conflict filled period of that person's life. If it's a famous figure, it's what we know that person for, mostly. Okay. Or in the Johnny Cash case, it's a lesser known thing that we didn't know that much. I mean, we knew something about this stuff, but it's not, it's a facet of Johnny Cash. It's not the Johnny Cash story. Okay. It's whatever is the most interesting, dramatic thing. That's what you need to focus on. And that doesn't mean you can't set it up with, a scene back in the past, a formative scene that shows, how this character got to be who they are. That's fine. But then once you've got that scene and we lay that pipe, then move forward into the era that the main crux of the story is going to be told in and stay there. Once you start chronicling decade by decade, you are opening cans of worms. First of all, you're dealing with potential casting and recasting issues. If you're looking at like having four actors play the same role, multiple time periods, which becomes incredibly expensive. Oh my God. I mean,
Well,
look,
yes, most of all, the biggest problem is, of course, where the story is concerned, because this type of story, okay, I'm telling the story of someone's entire life, becomes, and then this happens, and then that happens, and that is not story.
right.
Story is this happens. And because of that, the next thing happens. And because of that, the third thing happens. And that is what gives us story and a story arc and a character arc. And that is what's needed for a screenplay. You cannot have a this happens, and then that happens, and then that happens.
Yeah, and the problem is the writer who's usually taking this on, the material is usually close to them, very close to them. If they're adapting, let's say, a family member's story, mom, dad, grandparent, whatever, distant relative, and they lose the ability to make those judicious cuts that they need to make to just focus on the core of the story because they think everything is important. Well, maybe to you it's important. And, that's fine. If you want to get all that in there, do a documentary, right? Or write a book, get it all down there. There's other forms to do that. Writing a feature film screenplay is not one of them.
Exactly. And the one thing you always have to keep in mind when adapting something from one genre to film or TV is, the different requirements. Well, first of all, what makes the most sense when it comes to an adaptation? If you're adapting something, the first question you have to ask yourself is, what do I adapt it into? For example, is it a feature? Is it a TV series?
Mhm.
And what are the different requirements of all of that? For example, if you have a very, say, layered story where you have several subplots are actually important and need to be there, feature might not be the way to go. Maybe a
Right.
limited series or a TV show might be the way to go.
Yeah.
If you have something that is very protagonist driven with a strong character arc and a definitive endpoint, well, then it is a screenplay, maybe not a TV show.
Mhm.
And also, you have, again, different requirements. For example, if you're trying to adapt the play, well, that's difficult. There's a reason that just filmed theater is deadly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. If you put a camera down and you film a play that is, yeah, not good. So again, because plays live, well, first of all, they live on the shared moment with the audience, but also they live on dialogue, whereas screenplays live on visuals. So
Yeah.
just be aware of what the requirements are and know that adapting something means just that. You actually have to make changes.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we see a lot is people who've written a play and then they adapt their play into a screenplay. And again, that is the most common problem with those adaptations is they retain the talkiness of the play, 20-page long scenes, and there's only 3 or 4 locations throughout the whole thing. And look, that's great from a budget point of view, but is that interesting cinematically?
Exactly. It can work, but it rarely does. In fact,
Yeah.
the only instance that I can think of where it worked fantastically well is 12 Angry
12
Men.
Angry Men.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I
Exactly
mean,
what I was thinking.
yeah, it works as a movie because the tension never lets up.
Yeah.
Often with plays is that you have a lot of, subtext and character moments. You've got, let's call it Pinteresque moments where it's all in the subtext and people just tell stories about, going to the dry cleaners for half
Mhm.
an hour. And it's really about the subtext, which works very well when it's a shared space with the audience and the audience is there with you and gets it from the acting and and has the entire scene in front of them the entire time. It does not work as a movie. Whereas, for example, 12 Angry Men has none of that. 12 Angry Men is tension throughout, and we know
Yeah.
what the stakes are. It's life or death, literally.
Right.
So the tension never lets up. We're focused. It's great. But that's literally the only instance that I can think of where it actually worked really well.
So if you're going to do that, and we're not encouraging you not to do that, because look, there's some great plays, and lots of times that could make a great movie, but you have to be willing to kill your babies. You have to be willing to rethink things for the cinematic medium, restage scenes in other locations, trim scenes, add new scenes. It's a whole new medium. Okay. Movies are very different from books, which are very different from plays. All 3 of them tell stories, but they all do them in very different ways with very different length requirements, very different staging requirements, on and on and on and on. Let's bring up one more thing, which is another extremely common adaptation issue that we see. And that is knowing what to adapt from a piece of material and what to not adapt from a piece of material. Let's say, for example, you have a public domain novel book that you want to adapt into a movie. Okay, great. Or maybe you've optioned something or you have the rights to something, whatever it is. Let's just say it's a book. Okay. That book is inevitably going to have lots of characters. It's going to have lots of subplots. It's probably going to be more of an ensemble as opposed to a single character, single protagonist focused story. And that's perfectly fine for that medium. Okay. A literal way to adapt that would be to put that into a limited series. Okay. Then you could keep most of that texture, all those subplots, all those characters. That's great. But for many years, limited series didn't really exist except for, the occasional big event like Rush or Roots or Rush. Did I say Rush?
Yeah, you should say
Sorry.
Rush. You
I
were thinking
meant
about your T-shirt. Yeah.
I'm thinking about my hoodie. Roots or what was that one with the handsome beardy guy from back in the day? The Thornbirds
Oh,
or
the
whatever.
Thornbirds. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
whatever.
you're totally giving your age away here.
Yeah, like, look, you guys know what I'm talking about. But look, the point is a feature screenplay, if you are adapting a book into a feature screenplay, you are going to have to cut shit out. Okay? That's what it comes down to. And so many times we read adapted from my novel. Oh, also, it could be if someone's written their own novel and then they're adapting it into a screenplay. You can't, not literally, not scene by scene. It doesn't work. A 250-page or 300-page novel cannot be squashed intact into a 110-page screenplay, you are going to have to cut some characters, cut some subplots, consolidate characters, shrink the timeline, just get rid of some stuff, or it's just not going to work.
Exactly.
And that's why we always recommend following a good structural template. There's one in our own spec format and style guide, which I wrote, which is available for $4.95 on the Coverage Inc. website. And, beat by beat tells you the expectations of the typical movie structure. It's based on, Hero with a Thousand Faces and The Writer's Journey and all of that stuff. You follow a template like that, you'll know what is supposed to happen at any point in your story. And you'll also know, looking at your novel, like, well, this doesn't fit. What am I going to do here? Cut it. Cut it is what you do. And then that's how you wind up with a great movie adaptation, as opposed to the ones that we see all the time, which is like, did you try to squeeze you squeezed your whole book into this, didn't you? Yeah. And you changed the font to like 10.5 point to try to get as many words on the page as possible. Oh my God.
Exactly. And with that said, if you have any questions, info@coverageinc.com.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Smash that like button and please hit the notification bell. That tells the algorithm that you actually got something out of these videos and you want to be notified when we drop new content, which we do 2 or 3 times a week.